Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the next episode of Life's Black Belts. I'm your host, Eric Alders. As always, I love choosing individuals from around the world that have stories that help to mirror the journey that we follow, not only in martial arts, but more importantly, the reason I bring these guests on is to hear how their story in life has progressed. The journey of starting off as a child or a young adult all the way through modern day. All sorts of different backgrounds, all sorts of different expertises, but one common thread that as humans, we all share a similar story, similar struggles. And it's my hope in sharing these variety of stories that you too will find some inspiration. Today, I am joined by Mr. Chuck Ryland. He is a high-performance coach, a trainer. He's the author of multiple best-selling books, including his most recent titled Success, The Path to Personal Fulfillment Through Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu Fighters. He has a very interesting background, not only as a financial planner, but he's actually a former homicide detective and actually has a very interesting story that his his journey has taken him on. And I'm really interested to learn more about it, as I hope you are as well. So please help me in welcoming Mr. Chuck Ryland. How are you, sir?
I'm good this morning. Thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to chatting with you.
Well, I appreciate you taking the time out, reading through a little bit of your bio on your website and discussing briefly, having you on the show prior to this. It's obvious that you're a very busy man doing a lot of different things between your books and your career. And, I love finding out how people manage and balance this out with life and family, as I too own a business and do podcasting and have twin daughters. And, some people even wonder why I do a podcast, knowing how busy I am in the rest of my life. And like, how do you find time for that? I don't know. Maybe it's that martial arts mentality of always trying to pursue, your best and challenge yourself and never settle. But this story is about you, sir. So I wanted to take a step back a little bit. And I know that you started off in not the ideal environment. Some people, may grow up and have a completely positive environment growing up, and some other people have a completely different experience. And I've had both types of guests on the show. Could you share a little bit about your life when it had its start early on?
I guess so. My childhood is what you're asking. So
Yes, sir.
I grew up. I guess difficult's a word, but I see that as relative because I've seen people who have relatively good lives, but they think they have it hard, and then you have people who have it really bad, and it's all relative. So take that with a grain of salt. I had a rough childhood in that both my parents were really mentally ill in very different ways. So neither really worked. We lived in government housing projects. And there's a lot of things that come with mental illness as parents. Essentially, you end up kind of raising yourself at different periods, as like my mom was in and out of mental institutions. And so with that came bouts with law enforcement at my home and child protective services and issues that come with being poor and having a lot of shame with parents that were unusual, to say the least. So that's kind of what my childhood was like in a very short version. But you're welcome to ask me more. I can elaborate whatever you're looking for.
Absolutely. Well, I could relate, as I have a mom, similarly, that has mental illness as well and grew up with that. And, your situation sounds tougher because it was both parents. But did you have siblings by your side as well to help you through this time?
Yeah, I have a younger sister. She lives here, not with me, but in the same area. We grew up together. She's 3 years younger. So she, in some regard, had a little more difficult. Well, the younger one gets a little more coddled than the older one. The older one tends to have more expectations on them. But she was also not as, she was female. So that makes it a little different to be independent at a young age, I think, than it is for a male. And so she had to deal with the same things, but from a different perspective than I did. So we kind of had each other to relate to each other, but we also lived different experiences through that whole thing. Because I had left home a lot earlier than she did. I left about 16 years old.
Oh, wow.
So, and while she wasn't quite as independent because she was younger and wasn't quite working the same way I was at a young age. So we're there together, but we also had different journeys through the same experience.
Did you find yourself taking on more of a parenting type of a role for her as you had a little bit of a dysfunctional setup with your parents?
That'd be an interesting question to ask her. I don't think I did to the degree that maybe she would have needed. Um, that's a really good question. I've never considered. I don't think I was there for her to the degree that would have been good for her because I was trying to survive myself.
Of course.
And so very often I'd be just gone working, trying to stay out of the home and trying to make a living as a child, essentially. Um, so that's a great question. I've never asked her perspective, but I would have to say no if I was to really shorten things up.
Sure. Well, I mean, no correct answer. I only ask that because of having interviewed some others. I find when this type of situation goes up, sometimes the eldest sibling has to mature themselves much faster, whether a parent has passed early on or whatever the circumstances may be. That sometimes and it's even similarly to my wife grew up with two young sisters, and their father wasn't around a lot. They had a hardworking mother that worked overnights as a nurse, and because she was out of the house a lot, or when she was home sleeping, my wife took on more of that maternal role. So,
Right.
but what you have done is you use a very clear word there: is you had to survive. And
Mhm.
it's very important because, understanding as a young man, maybe you didn't have a full understanding what mental illness is, but trying your best to keep yourself mentally healthy and busy and occupied is a very normal way. People dive into work or exercise, or unfortunately, sometimes they're drawn into the wrong crowd as well. Um, at what point do you feel like you were mature and old enough to realize that something wasn't quite right and you had to do what you needed to do to remove yourself from that situation?
Oh man, as young as I can remember, I had that point of view, and I'm talking 8, 9 years old at least. And my father later had told me how independent I was at a young age, and I think it was out of necessity. Maybe there's some genetics involved too. But I was very rebellious as a young kid, and I had an anti-authority perspective that young because I s- I had I saw my parents as inferior to me, not in only because I had to, because they weren't quite capable of raising me, and so had to adopt a role of being superior to them in some regards, and so that kind of made my view towards quote unquote authority, where I didn't really have a lot of respect for authority because they weren't really behaving in a proper way. Not to any fault of their own necessarily, but because of the issues they had of their own. And so very early I was rebellious and on my own. And I looked at it very early on um, as a cancer that I had to sever to
Mm,
separate myself.
wow.
So I could articulate this easier later as I go older, but I really saw it as I had to cut off my own leg to protect the rest of my body kind of thing. And so that was
Understood.
kind of my attitude at a very, very young age, which served me well in some regards, but it also comes with some consequences too.
Right. Well, it seems like the maturity that you needed and the parenting you needed had to come from within. So maybe there was so much focus that had to be put on yourself to survive the situation and navigate it properly that maybe there wasn't that much left over. Reflecting back on your younger sister right there. What did you do? You said you're out of the house at 16. I mean, that sounds very young. I know 18 is a number for some people that still sounds young, but they're at least an adult. How do you exit at 16, and what's that path look like?
Yeah, so I don't remember ever not working from, the earliest job being a paper route. I don't know how young you could do that, but riding your bike, they don't do it anymore, but kids could ride their bikes back then and
Right.
throw newspapers and I was always selling something. So I always had some kind of jobs, and then they morphed into more serious jobs. So I always was working. And so even at high school, I was working the equivalent of full time with 2 part-time jobs. And by about my sophomore year, I was able to go like half time to school somehow. I don't know how they managed it, but I was able to pull that off.
Mm.
And then I was able to work 2 part-time jobs. And so first I had moved out with some friends. Most of my friends were older, out of high school. And so I was able to rent a room, and those guys kind of helped me out a little bit too. And so that's kind of the first move, that was the first step. Um, it definitely wasn't easy. I can assure you that, but somehow I made it happen. And then I finished high school, um, almost a year early, not because I was intelligent. I wasn't. It was that I did the I didn't drop out, but I went to the extra school that dropout kids go to, so that I was able to finish some classes earlier, just so that I could work,
So out of high school, what was the next step for you?
Well, I started out doing machining work. I was real into engines and stuff. So that was kind of my career path, working on cars and engines, rebuilding motors and stuff. And I was going to junior college at the same time. I finished junior college while working at these machine shops. And I hit a turning point where I wanted to go on to college and get into finance and do that kind of thing. But I didn't know how to do it. Junior college is one thing where I essentially would get like free tuition because I was poor. But to go to a university, I didn't know how to do it. And I got accepted to a university. But instead, I decided to go to police academy because I very consciously thought I can save up 6 months living expenses to go to the police academy to pay my own way through. But I couldn't foresee how in the world I could go to a university. And so I ended up picking the police academy. It turned out to be a really good choice for me.
But someone that had such an issue, self-admittedly, with authority, why, why was the police academy the go-to choice? Did you have friends or family around you that was like, listen, this is a great spot to get yourself on your feet, get a career, health benefits and pensions and things along those lines? Or, what was it that motivated you? Was just the goal of putting yourself through school? Well, why specifically that?
Well, the authority question is interesting. So I think a lot of good cops have that same kind of attitude. They're in essence enforcing law, but they don't really want to comply with the law themselves, right? And so when you have that, you have to have a good moral compass to do the right thing, not because authority is expecting it, but because internally you think it's the right thing. And so I've always had that. I've always had this desire to do the right thing. And then my childhood heroes became TV characters, movie heroes. So like the Bruce Willis Die Hard story, Lethal Weapon, and these kind of people.
Awesome movies.
Yeah, these were literally my father figures, these fake people on TV. And so I liked the whole idea of being that hero and being that person and the action and the excitement. And I wanted to be the character in those movies that's respected and looked up to when I didn't feel that internally back then. And so I kind of was like very intentionally at a young age creating myself into those people. And so becoming a cop was part of that. It gave me the opportunity to be that kind of person and to have some excitement too. I mean, I love the action. I love the police chases, the fights. I lived for that stuff back then. I'm too old for it now, but
of course,
I loved it then. So it was all those things combined.
Well, do you, maybe not at the time, but as you've gotten a little bit older, do you reflect back on that at all and wonder if that was consciously or subconsciously a part of feeling that your father, let's say in this experience, was maybe not the hero that you hoped for, or the man that you hoped for, and that hopefully maybe one day if you were to have a wife or children, that you wanted to be a different type of figure for them? Or do you feel like that was not something you've really reflected on?
No, yeah, for sure. It was very, very conscious that I didn't like my father. I like with my mother, they were different people. So my mother, I had more, she had a very extreme mental illness that I had more compassion for her. Whereas my father, it was a little bit more bad choices combined with some mental illness. So I had a much more animosity towards him. And so my role and goal was to not be him. So it was to be the opposite of him.
Right.
And so these characters that I would want to emulate, and they're fake. So as you get older, you realize, well, this is fake. But when you're young, it's like, I'm going to be that guy. And so it was very conscious. I didn't want to be him. I wanted to be the opposite. And what's interesting is later in life, my dad and I rekindled a relationship. And he actually says, I'm grateful that you tried not to be me because you became somebody that he was very proud of, So that was kind of neat.
That is. What was the experience of being, I know, I did in the intro that you were a homicide detective at one point. But what was the experience like for you on the force, and what town specifically did you work in? I imagine in California.
There was two I worked in, one called Lompoc, another called Santa Maria. They're on the Central Coast, right between LA and San Francisco.
Okay, so a pretty well built up area. So did you, you know, how long? Let me rewind a little bit. How long were you an active police officer for?
For 15 years.
Okay. During that time, what are some of the most significant moments, memories, or things that you feel shaped you as a man as you look back on it?
Shaping me? Well, that's an interesting question because there's several pieces of that. And
Right.
so um, for sure, I became very, very confident. And that came from a few things. One, I'm very active in martial arts. And so you train these martial arts, but I got the chance to really try them in real life and be very dominant in fights. And so that boosted my confidence. So as a man, I think most kids, teenagers, see the Karate Kid story and see themselves as the kid getting bullied and wanting to be the one who's no longer afraid of the bullies. At least that's true for me. And so as a cop, I no longer had that fear because I was in real altercations with really violent people and winning. And so that really validated me as a man in that regard.
Mm.
Additionally, I was very competent in my career. So that gave me confidence as an individual growing in a career, which is also an important thing for a man, I think, is to feel successful in their line of work. So those things were very, very beneficial. And then another aspect that's very different was I walked into police work with my model of the world as seen through television movies, meaning there were good guys and bad guys. I was a good guy, other people were bad guys. And then as you get older, you realize that's just not the case. And very often police officers are bad guys. The bad guys are good guys, just making mistakes. They're doing the best they can. And the world's very gray. And so my sense of morality got very confused. It wasn't so crystal clear like it was when you're young and you get older, and it's much more nuanced. So that was a big change for me, was understanding that the world is gray and not black and white.
I want to come back to that point because I have a question on that. But
Okay.
prior, you interjected about utilizing your martial arts live and in the field. When did martial arts enter your life, and what martial arts did you specifically train in?
The first martial art I did was probably 13, 14-ish. And I found some guy somehow. I don't know how I found this guy, but he would give me a ride to the YMCA, and it was called Tong Sudo.
Okay.
So it was a stand-up martial art.
Mm-hmm.
And I did that for at least a year or two with those guys. I don't know what happened with it, but eventually I found Taekwondo, which was a block away from my house, which was the only reason that I went to it. Back then, there wasn't any knowledge of martial arts being better than the other like there is today. It was kind of like whatever you stumble across. And so I got really, really proficient in Taekwondo. I really enjoyed it. I'm 6'3", so kicking was a real asset for a tall, lean guy. And so I really excelled in that. But in police work, there's not a lot of kicking people in the face,
Right.
Unless you want to go to
Exactly.
jail, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
And so I had confidence from that, but I really wasn't applying it really well. It would still end up being a wrestling brawl. And then I got in this fight, and this coworker who I'm so grateful to, he says, "Man, we got to do jujitsu together." And I'm like, "What is that nonsense?" And he kind of told me about it, and I wasn't buying into it because, I love Taekwondo because that was my thing. So whatever your thing is, everything else is wrong.
Mm.
And he gave me these old VHS tapes, those early UFCs. And
That's awesome.
that was it. And then I started driving 3 hours one way to Torrance, California.
Are you trained at the Gracie Academy?
Yeah, because there was nowhere else. So there was nowhere around. No one had a black belt. No one did jiu-jitsu. No one even knew about it. It turned out there was like one or two other guys in garages here at the time, and we later reconnected and trained together. But back then, I'd drive I had a weekday off, so Wednesdays was my day off. I had no kids. I was single, and so I'd drive out to LA 3 hours, and I'd train there all day and then drive back. So I do 6 hours once a week driving to train with those guys. And then I started buying VHS tapes and went from there, you know.
So did you train directly with Horian and Hoist and or who were your instructors at the academy?
Yeah, Horion was around and Hoist was in and out. I never got to train with him, but he was around the gym, and I wish I could have rolled with him. That'd have been a great thing, you know. But and you know, even then, I didn't realize the significance of who they were. It wasn't until later that you had more of a historical perspective of what they did. In fact, what they did back then wasn't that big. It wasn't as big as it is today when you realize the impact they've had on the martial arts history.
That's huge.
Right?
Pioneers and one of many, but one of the most significant, influential martial art families in the world, and how it's changed and shifted how people still train to this day. If you look back at the first UFCs, the commentators didn't even know what they were talking about. You know, Hoist Gracie's on his back. He's losing. Why is the guy on top tapping out? What's happening? They didn't know it. I mean, same for me. I started in a stand-up art of Goju-Ryu, and then got into a mix of Taekwondo, Kempo, and some Aikido and some kickboxing, and then saw the first UFC. And I thought I was good, because I was, you know, sparring everyone in the gym and doing great on my feet. And then I was like, wait, if someone could take me down like that, what do I do? So I found a guy locally I trained with that was a Gracie black belt in New Jersey. And then I ended up going right before college to a weekend seminar in New York with Hoist Gracie.
How cool
and
is that?
I idolized him. And I remember sitting, this is right after UFC 4 when he fought Ron Van Cleef. And I remember sitting in the gym. We're all just, you know, shaking hands with everyone that's waiting. I just remember him walking in, and I felt like Elvis walked into the room. And not only did I knew how incredible he was as a martial artist and instructor myself, one thing, a memory stands out to me is that I think he was teaching like a guillotine choke or a Kimura or something. And I raised my hand. I had a question on it because, I mean, even then, no one even knew what this stuff was. And instead of coming over and demonstrating on me or demonstrating on someone else, he put himself in position for me to do the submission on him.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember wrapping him up. I'm like, I can't believe I'm doing this to Hoist Gracie right now. And he's like, no, you know, squeeze here, do this. And then he tapped me out. And all I can remember in my head was like, I just tapped out Hoist Gracie.
That's awesome.
Of course, I kept that thought. I kept that thought to myself.
Yeah, I've tapped out Hoist Gracie. That's great.
But it was about taking someone that was a world champion, and he was humble enough to put himself in a situation so that you could feel it and he could know that the technique was correct. And it stood out to me. And even talking to him on the side, not being like, you know, I'm Hoist Gracie, get away from me. Just couldn't give you enough of his time and energy. And you know, thankfully, I you know, after college, you know, continued martial arts and got back into it. But what a cool experience you had, and the dedication and motivation it takes. I mean, some people won't drive 7 minutes to try to say that they have 2 days a week in their busy life to find an hour to train a little bit. And being even how many police officers I come in contact with that have their 2 weeks of hand-to-hand combat training or doing what you did. And I couldn't imagine going out there. I mean, if I was a police officer, I'd want to be like Navy SEAL status, like Jocko Willink or something like that, going out there.
That was my thing. Was I wanted to be the best.
Be the best, absolutely. I mean, your life's on the line. You want to come home and talk to your family at the end of the day. Yeah. Moving back forward to the question that popped up when you were talking about one of the significant moments for you as an officer was understanding the difference between the good guys, the bad guys, and things became more gray than black and white. Was it you having these personal situations where you saw the humanity in people, where you could understand that it wasn't just you robbed somebody or this happened or that happened? You understood that there was a financial circumstance, there was mental illness, there was motivation behind it. They got mixed. Maybe they had a life that you had, but instead of going down the path you did, they found their significance in gangs or whatever it may be. Just if you could elaborate a little bit more on that experience for you, what brought you more to that realization that it was more gray than black and white?
A few different things. In my young years, early 20s, I was very judgmental, self-righteous. Like, I'm good and they're bad. So if we as police officers were dealing with them, they were bad. And I think most young officers see it that way. And I think it's almost necessary to some degree when you're young like that, because if I were a cop today, I'd probably have so much compassion that no one would go to jail, right? Like I would see that, hey, this person's having a hard time and they're trying their best, but we need consequences for bad choices in life. And so I was very judgmental, and I saw myself as superior to these people, which was kind of me stemming from my childhood of me looking down upon my parents, whereas I didn't make a lot of excuses. And so I would work myself out of bad situations. So I didn't have compassion for people that were in bad situations, if that makes sense.
It does.
And so as I got older, my wife, who was my high school sweetheart, she ended up cheating on me. And here again, it wasn't that she was such a bad person. It was I was so obsessed with my career, I didn't give her attention. And so I looked at her as the bad person back then. And then we got into this fight, like not physical fight, but husband-wife fight, until where the police were called to my house. And so all of a sudden the roles were reversed, and the first time the cops are separating us and talking to me, I'm like, wow, this is kind of awkward. And it really like threw me for a loop. I'm like, now I'm that person, and I'm not a bad person. We just had a bad moment. So that was kind of like an eye-opening moment for me, where I started now when I'd go to husband-wife fights, I had a totally different attitude. I was like, no, I get it. This is tough. Rather than being judgmental and preachy and stuff like that. So that was kind of like the can opener or the beginning. And then from there, when you're in the business long enough, you find that your friends, one of my friends, we were young, we used to arrest drug dealers all the time. And it was fun. It's kind of like going hunting. And you'd become self-righteous. Well, long story short, he got injured, and pretty soon he's abusing and drugs and addicting or injecting like heroin type of opiates into his system, and he ended up died from it. So you see these stories over and over of cop gets a DUI or whatever, and when you see that, hey, these are good guys, but they had a bad time. Now all of a sudden, I can look at other people not as bad guys, but as other human beings.
Right.
And then I also saw outright corruption too. I mean, it's very rare. It's not the kind of corruption that they preach about on YouTube, but you see some very bad decisions, especially the higher up you go in the ranks of police departments. And so,
well, I think any career, any field is going to have its bad apples for sure. Yeah. I thought I didn't want to assume I wanted you to express it yourself, but I thought that was kind of going to be what you talked about when you started to learn the humanity. I had a very similar experience. I have a friend that's still in jail. Great guy. Unfortunately. And I know many people that have driven home and thought they were okay. I only had 2-3 drinks and I'm fine. Well, long story short, he had one of those days, and just so happened it was like, right before Thanksgiving, big day to drive, a lot of DUI checkpoints. And unfortunately, he ended up getting into an accident. The car he hit ended up flying across the road, hit a tree, burst into flames, and the person inside died. It happens to be the person inside was a police officer. Off duty. Wow. So everything that could have gone wrong went wrong. As a kid that was married, had a child, was making a lot of great money as in his career. And I remember going to visit him before he even got sentenced at the county jail. And I've never been to a jail in my life ever. And this is someone I've known since I'm a teenager, a best friend. And what I took out of that is when I had to talk to him through a window and glass, and what you talked about, knowing this man, knowing who he is, knowing that many people I know made that same mistake, but they made it home and they don't look twice at it. His mistake lasted forever. And when we exited, there was a mother and daughter visiting somebody in the next, I want to call it a booth over. And we were in the elevator on the way back down, and all I saw was a little girl to her mom crying, "When's daddy coming home?" And I was like, man, I never thought about it this way before. You watch the news and you hear about some drunk driver hitting someone, or this person did a crime, or whatever it may be. And you're like, good, I'm glad they caught him, piece of crap off the street. And then you change the channel, you move on. You don't realize there's like a son, a daughter, a family. And for me, I started taking a step back. Similar, you have a completely different, obviously, hands-on experience than I did. But for me, that was an eye-opening moment of seeing the humanity in these stories. Being as a homicide detective, I mean, you've seen the worst that humanity has to offer. And even in these moments, you're still able to reflect back and not just have a hatred towards, people seeing, doing what you do. I ask officers all the time, how do you separate that from, what you see, and you see such evil, to come home and not take that out on your family or friends? And how do you maintain clarity in your life? So how did you do that?
I didn't do it very well. I really
Okay.
didn't. When I retired from law enforcement, I feel like it took 3 or 4 years before I became human again. And what I mean by human is like, now I'm kind of like a little bitch when I see like movies. I cry like a little. I'm very sensitive now, and I don't know. I never had that my whole childhood and my whole career. I had to be hard, and so that doesn't go well in family life, right? To be very rigid and very black and white. And like I give you an example. Like as a cop, you can see people lying so easily. It's so obvious, and because you're dealing with professional liars all day. So one time I was with my ex-wife, and our daughter, who was a teen, came home. She did something, I don't know, out late or whatever teenagers do. And she's telling her mom her story of why she was late. And I'm watching this, and mom goes, "Oh, okay, good. I'm glad everything's fine. Go to bed." And I'm like, hold on.
Yeah, I call BS.
I'm like, are you just tired, mom, and not want to deal with it? Because as parents, we just sometimes are that. And she's like, no. Like, well, let's start over. And I tell my daughter, like, start all over with the truth, without all the lies. And even, I'm doing my police thing, interrogating her, and the whole story comes out. And my ex-wife's like, how in the hell do you know? And I'm like, how in the hell do you not know? Right. And so that's not always a good approach in family life, right? Because,
Right.
and that's just one example of the way you bring it home. And so I don't think you can turn it off at home. People fake it and try to, but they end up turning it off with alcohol or whatever.
Of course.
And so I've had to be removed from that to become quote unquote human again, I guess.
Well, what brought you out of the force after 15 years?
I got injured in a fight, and then there's a long story too, but eventually I ended up getting on these prescription pills, which I knew were stupid and everything, but I didn't know what else to do. And so eventually with the pills, they're like, you're out. You can't keep doing this. And I wasn't getting treatment. Workers' comp system's a mess and everything. I was kind of mentally ready to go. I wasn't financially ready to go, but I kind of got pushed out. I really didn't have a choice as a result of this injury.
So then what? I mean, you're in a career for 15 years. You're that guy. You're John McClane that you wanted to be. You know what I mean, right? I don't know if you had a Nakatomi experience or not, but you're this guy doing this every day. And then boom, you have to face the reality of doing something different in your life. I mean, obviously I could, look in the crystal ball now because I'm talking to you after the fact and I introduced you with what you do now. So can you help bridge the gap between that moment and what happened next and what brought you to where you are today?
Yeah. So a few things happened, some unintentionally and some by luck or fate. And so I'd always been training. My whole life, adult life, has been I learn something and I teach it back. So I was always teaching cops about what we call rest and control. I've always been a teacher at the police academy, teacher in the department. And so I always had this parallel teaching career at the college simultaneously. So that was a part-time gig that was already there that gave me something to land back on. And then the other thing was I was starting to get burned out about law enforcement. It wasn't exciting anymore. And so I actually had left a couple years earlier. I took a year time off and went back and got my master's degree with the goal of doing my earlier plan of getting into personal finance. And so I ended up opening a business on the side where I was coaching people about their finances. So I had that little thing kind of on the side and my teaching career on the side. So that gave me somewhere to start. I mean, it wasn't easy. You go from income and then the next day no income. I had these part-time gigs, but I just kept working at that thing, and that has since morphed into I still teach. I do a lot of expert witness work in different homicide trials, And then I have my coaching practice where it's personal finance and business and life coaching type stuff. And then my books, I write a lot of books. So all of these things kind of grew little by little, a little bit by design, a little bit by accident, right place at the right time, etc.
Okay, so getting into finance, what do you find that you're coaching people on mostly? Because I feel like everyone, myself included, have all experienced moments of financial stress and wanting to plan for their future. And, again, myself owning a business, I opened it 4 months after my twin girls were born, had no, paycheck for 2 years. And, my wife works, I work, et cetera. And, you just try to get by. So what is it that you're seeing, or, briefly, if you could give some ideas, tips, or feedback to maybe at least plant the seed for people to maybe want to learn a little bit more about your teachings and pick up one of your books. So if you have any sort of a feedback from these experiences and coaching sessions that you could share.
Yeah, I've learned this because I've been an avid student of marketing for at least a decade and trial and error. And so in order to bring somebody in as a coaching client, they need a very clear path. So for example, if it were you, for example, and you're like, I want to grow my business. Okay, let's build a marketing plan. Let's build out your marketing funnel. Or another person who comes in and says, I want to work on my retirement. I need to save for my IRA or whatever, 401k. That's how everyone walks in the door, through some path like that. And if you Google something about personal finance, you're going to get articles like how to set up your retirement fund, how to get more clients for your business, or whatever. That's what everyone comes in on, but no one needs that information. I mean, you need it basically, but within a Google search, you can find all the answers to these questions. But every single person, what's really in the way is themselves. And they need to figure out what is going on internally that's keeping them from reaching their goals. So if you want to lose weight, there's thousands of books and coaches and all this stuff, but it's very simple. Move more and eat less, right? That's so simple. But yeah, if there's a brownie right here, I'm going to eat the damn brownie, even though I'm on a diet. And so it's about figuring out what's going on inside of our head that's keeping us from saving money, that's keeping us from growing our business. And it's always way more complicated and deeper than we really realize. And so it always starts with these types of things, the mechanics. And then as I build rapport with people, I learn, oh, what's this about? Oh, tell me more about that. And then they start to realize with time, oh, it's not that I don't know what to do. It's that there's this thing going on that's driving me unconsciously and I don't even know about it.
So when you're coaching somebody, obviously, like you talked about diet, for example, how simple it is, eat less, move more. But even with martial arts, that's my more line of expertise. People are always looking for, shortcuts, I find. They don't necessarily want to do the work and sacrifice that it takes. They might see you or someone else that's reached a certain level of success or proficiency and want to go, okay, you did it. How can I get to where you were at, 10 times faster? What is it that you're finding? Are you finding common things that keep coming up that's holding people back from whatever goal it is that they want? Is it fear? Is it doubt? Is there, obviously everyone's story is custom, but what are you finding keeps showing its face over and over again?
It's a great question. I'm trying to think of how to answer it, because there's different types of people, and meaning they're at different stages of their life. And so the people who I will not take as clients, but they're a vast majority of people in a first conversation. If they present themselves as a victim in any way, they're not eligible to be a client. And it's not that I don't want to help them. It's that they're not in a place where they're ready to be. So a lot of people go through life saying, I would like to do this, but I can't because of X, Y, and Z. And once you're stuck with that, there's nothing to change that. So if you think, I'm trying to think of an example on the fly. If you think you can't if you think you can't lose weight because your parents did this to you, or because you have big bones, or your metabolism is off, or whatever stories you want to tell, there's no fixing that until you start accepting complete responsibility. And so, of course, there are things in our life, like my parents were not ideal parents, and I could use that my whole life as an excuse of why I'm not moving forward. even though it was a real fact that they didn't set me up easily. But I have to at some point accept, okay, I can only control this moment forward and what I do with that. So that's one segment of people, is that they're just not ready to take responsibility for the things they do have control over. But the people who are past that and they're ready to accept responsibility, the next thing is not being afraid to admit that you don't know something. And so the example that you might connect to is, if I know a certain move in jiu-jitsu and I'm really, really good at that, but I refuse to go to some new technique that I'm not good at because I'm going to lose that particular match or that role. It requires complete putting your ego aside and saying, I don't know this new thing, and I'm willing to not be good at it for a while, so that instead of just being good at my one thing, I'm going to be good at two things and then three things, and constantly putting yourself in that learner's role over and over, and be willing to be humble enough to do that.
Well, I think you bring up a lot of good points. Ego, stories that we tell ourselves, trying to place blame on others because it's easier. Why am I like this? Well, it's got to be other people's fault. I didn't move up in this company because of this person, next to me has cheated their way through, or they're friends with this guy. And, like you talked about with losing weight, it could be, I just don't have enough time in my day. I'm busy. I work all day. I can't eat anything healthy. We're a world full of excuses and stories. And the point that I could completely agree with you on is that we're only truly responsible for ourselves and taking full responsibility. And I think the jiu-jitsu example you gave is one that I use often, even in the podcast here, is that you have to learn to become comfortable in uncomfortable situations. If you walk into, again, stick with the story of jiu-jitsu. If you walk into a good jiu-jitsu school with a giant ego, you're going to get checked very, very quickly. There is no ego to exist. I don't care what level you're at. There are people that are better than you that are going to tap you out 1,000 times. And what I'll say to people often is like, listen, you could enter that, and this could be used for anything. I'm just using it as a metaphor because you brought up jiu-jitsu. But if you're going into a situation where you're getting tapped out constantly by a variety of people in class, because ultimately as humans, we compare ourselves to others and then reflect on how they compare to our own life. And either that makes us happy or gets us depressed. But you can look at all these people that are better than you, and one path you could take is that, man, these people are so talented. I don't have the time, the energy, the discipline, the focus to ever get that good. So you know what? Screw it. Why am I wasting my time? Me, and maybe you and others, will take those same ass whoopings and then go, man, if I stick with this, I might be that good one day.
Right.
It's the same thing as happening to me. It's the way that I process it and approach it that's different. And I think that's ultimately what you're saying here, is that people's story, their dialogue internally, their ability to look in the mirror and say, what could you do about this? Not what did everyone else do to hold me back? Because, how many stories have you heard from Oprah to anyone else that had an awful, rough life and have created this tremendous amount of success for themselves? So, you could have results or you could have excuses, but you can't have both. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
I think that's what you're relating to. People's stories are individual, but that's kind of what I wanted to pull out of you a little bit is that common ground I think that we could agree on that you're finding in a lot of your clients is that, one, you need to change your I should do this to I must. And if you're not willing to make that change, it's just not going to happen for you. But why, go into I'm assuming, how's the financial business going for you? Has it been successful?
Yeah, my coaching business is doing very well.
So,
And more importantly,
yeah.
it's the most rewarding thing I do.
But why transition from a police officer to that, do well at it? And I'm sure you could, take on tons of clients because everyone could utilize life coaching and financial help. Why then take it to the next step and put out books? Was it because there's that teacher side of you that you just realized you were helping some people within your environment that you wanted to be able to expand your lessons and knowledge out to more? What motivated you to go that step further? Because it's more, other people might hear, yeah, maybe I could teach other people things and write a book, but it's more work and more focus. And I got to sit down, and again, the excuses come back in. Why put more work on yourself and add more to your plate?
Well, there's two sides of this, two answers to this question. One was, I see everything that I do now as the same thing. And what I mean by that is it took a while for me to connect the dots. And there was a speech by Steve Jobs where he talks about, all these random things that happen in your life, and then later all the dots connect. It's one of my favorite commencement speeches of all time because I relate to it now that I'm in my 40s, where all the dots are starting to connect. Whether I write a book, whether I'm talking to you and your audience on this podcast, whether I'm talking to a jury on the stand as an expert witness, whether I'm teaching in front of a class, writing a book, whatever it is, or coaching one-on-one, I'm just relaying knowledge and wisdom that I've gained back to other people, hoping that it's a little easier for them because they take something away from what I said and shortens their learning curve. Whether I do it in different mediums, whether it's on a podcast or a book, it's all the same thing to me. So that's the broad picture. Now, the more granular specific was, I started this financial planning practice and started studying marketing because I wanted to learn how to make a business work. And it came to, after a lot of different trial and error things, I've figured out the best way to promote yourself as an expert is to write a book about your subject. And so I wrote the first book, and I enjoyed it. I don't enjoy writing. It kind of sucks, to be honest, but I enjoy the process of getting my thoughts clear on paper. And then the experience of somebody going, I read this and it really helped me in this way. Thank you. Like, that's very rewarding to me. And that just grew from there. That first one was, I just kept doing it after that.
Right. Well, I mean, as a teacher myself, and I'm sure others that have given back or been involved with charities or whatever it may be, when you do good by other people, when you actually try in the best way possible to selflessly help others, and you could see the positive influence you had on them, it feels amazing. You know, I mean, there's many moments in the 2 years of running the school here and not getting paid and having babies at home and, you know, remembering back to days that we were on a WIC and had to get help from, you know, family members dropping groceries off at the front door and helping us get by, of going like, what am I doing? You know what I mean? Like I could go get a job and not have to stress out about any of this. And then, you know, the stories start to come in, and a parent tells you about the impact you've had on their child or on their life or how their grades improved, or, you know, years and years later, people come back and say how you're still an influence to them. Everything from the child that's now a super athlete in whatever sport they're in now, and they reflect on their martial arts training to have gotten them there, to grown men that are national sales managers that said that they used to be terrified of giving speeches in front of these big groups or board meetings, and now they just have the utter confidence to be able to do that. It was those moments that I wasn't getting paid, but started feeling very wealthy because I was contributing back and helping those around me. Is that something that you feel, just to kind of elaborate more on what you were saying there, that keeps you passionate and motivated to continue what you're doing?
Yeah, at this stage in my life, I'm fortunate that I've had enough experiences and I have a large enough network that I get really good career opportunities financially, but I turn them down. And I could make a lot more money with a lot less work than I do now. Writing a book is a pain in the ass, and coaching is a challenging business to grow. The expert witness work is random. So I could have a good quality full-time job that pays really well, and work a lot fewer hours than I do. However, I'm much happier feeling like I'm doing something that matters rather than just doing something that pays me well, even if that job has a really prestigious title. So, yeah, I'm at this stage in my life where giving back to people is really what fuels me. And if we talked about this 20 years ago, I'd have thought I was an idiot. I didn't buy into this story. But now that I've kind of done what I wanted to do for myself, the real joy is helping others get there. And I know that sounds silly to some people, but when you're at that point in your life, or at least I am, it's far more rewarding to help somebody in some way reach their goals than for me to get a new car or a bigger house or whatever.
Well, I mean, that's your life experience, though, and the challenges you've gone through and navigating life and looking back and reflecting and figuring out where you want to go next that brought you to where you're at. You know, a lot of the books that I saw that you wrote are very financial based. And then your most recent one is based on, you know, the personal, fulfillment through Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu fighters. What what motivated you to bring that book forward? Was it your personal experience or the coaches and classmates you encountered and seeing how they interact with people or in their lives or careers? What was the catalyst for you to start that book up?
Yeah, so the first two books I wrote were very intentionally market driven tools. They're for promoting my business. And then I hit this point in my life, and I saw it a lot in jujitsu, but in other areas too, where my drive in my younger years was to overcome insecurity. That's really what it was when you dig down into it. And when I hit this point where I was pretty confident and very competent also in life, and I was successful from any outside measure, I kind of lost a little bit of the drive. Like I no longer needed to work as hard because I had already hit what I was trying to achieve. So I started asking myself, okay, well, what's going to keep me going now? What do I do? Because what's the point if you don't have this thing you're working towards? And so I started talking to people more about this subject. And that led to the book you're talking about, Success, is really the second book. The first one was called Motivation. They're very much the same book. One's just a sequel. And what I wanted to do is ask all these very successful jiu-jitsu athletes who'd done it for a long time, what drove them in the early years and what continues to drive them now. And it was really a quest for me to answer that question for myself. The book was an excuse to go out and have these really odd conversations that you can't really have over a beer, and podcasts provide that opportunity for you too, right? You can have conversations that you wouldn't otherwise have. And that allowed me to dig in. And then once I figured it out for myself through that project, sharing that back with other people is very rewarding too, because the feedback I get is constant. It's constantly where people are saying, man, the story you wrote, it touched me in this way because I felt the same way. And I didn't know that this successful person was going through the same hardships I was. And that makes me feel, hopeful. So that's how those two books came about. The second one was quite honestly driven by demand. People saying, hey, I want more of these stories. And that's why I did the most recent book called Success. And that one's a little better because I've gotten better at it. You get better with time. But
I love it. I mean, that's originally how, in full disclosure, how we connected, because I guess owning a martial arts school, part of your marketing plan is to reach out to different school owners. And, you were very generous and just wanted to offer, and I got it right here, to offer me a copy of your book. And then what I had noticed, and we touched base on online, was that we have a common friend in this book and colleague, and was honored to have him as an instructor for 10 years, which is Master Ricardo Laborio. I also had him on the podcast as well. I would imagine speaking to him is also was a big step for you. And there's amazing people that you have in this book, but talking about understanding the history of jiu-jitsu and where it came from with the Gracie family, Master Laborio is right up there with all of them as a true pioneer in the industry. So I would definitely recommend people to pick up a copy about that, because it's irrelevant if you're a martial artist or not, like you talked about, which is again a part of this podcast. What do we all share in common, no matter what the expertise is? Maybe you can't relate to a homicide police officer who's now a financial expert and author and life coach. Maybe you're in a cubicle doing something completely different. Maybe you're a parent. We all have to navigate this world and life and try to figure out how to be the best versions of ourselves, how to stay motivated, how to continue to succeed, and try to learn and grow and mature. It's tough to summarize all of that, I would imagine, but are there certain bits of advice that you find yourself giving out to people, or things that you've learned from doing books like these that you'd like to pass on to somebody? It doesn't have to be one killer line that you like. It could be a great quote, or it could just be a method of how to approach life. But, overall, if someone's listening and they need to emulate some of the stories that are in this book, or others that you've written, or what you do with your clients, obviously generically speaking, because you don't have a set story in front of you, what types of advice would you give to somebody if they're looking for that next change in their life, that next step, that they want to improve their life, whatever it's physically, mentally, financially, or whatever it may be? What do you think is maybe step one or the path they should follow?
The I'm going to answer it with two things. The
Okay.
first is what we talked about is stop the victim talk. And there's a direction in our society to encourage people to be victims, which is just absolutely detrimental to an individual. That whole mindset empowers people politically and stuff, but as an individual, it's just destructive. We all have things that happen to us, and we can deal with those in therapy or whatever you need to do, but it does no good to hold on to those. You have to move on. We can acknowledge the bad things happen, but we have to move on. Second is, this was very important to me as an individual, and I see it with all my clients. When you feel stuck in life, which we all do, no matter who you are, there's moments where we feel stuck, and people put labels on it of depression or whatever label you want to call it. It's find something of some sort of meaning to you, and it doesn't have to be saving the world. It can be small. It can be earning your next belt in a martial art. It can be whatever it is you want. And take incremental steps every single day towards that goal. And the steps can be extremely small. But it's critical that you have a purpose, so that when you go to bed each night, this is very important to me. Every time I go to bed at night, I think, if I don't have to be at work to 8 to 5, so often jobs lay this out for you by saying you need to be here at 8 o'clock. If you don't have that, or if it's the weekend, the night before, you decide, what is it that I'm going to do tomorrow that's going to bring me closer to my thing? And that may be waking up at 8 o'clock and walking around the block because you want to lose 10 pounds. It doesn't matter. As long as you did something, you will feel purpose in life, and you will feel successful for having accomplished that little tiny task towards your bigger goal. Without some sort of goal in front of you, I find that that's when all of the bad things happen: overeating, depression, any kind of negative thing. It's when you don't have a purpose and you're not working towards that purpose.
Yeah, well said. I think a lot of people, whatever goal they're trying to achieve, often look at the entire picture of all the things that are needed, all the pros and cons, all the twists and turns that might come along the way, and then they start telling a story that didn't even happen yet, and it could be extremely overwhelming. But what you're saying, I think, is a very key. Some people could say it's simple, but it's so powerful that you just have to take step one. If there's 5,000 steps, take step one. You hear many motivational speakers will say, start with making your bed every morning. It could be something simple like that, because it's, again, that feeling of accomplishment. I mean, think of how many times you've had a to-do list and you stare at it all day and you're like, man, I didn't do nothing today. And on the other day, when you actually cross 5 things off that list and you feel like you're in the zone, you're like, man, I did. You might have 100 things on your list, but if you did 5, you're like, man, today was a good day. I got a lot done. And that feels so much better. And of course you could have your bad days, but I feel like you kind of have to honor your emotions sometimes. If you're having a really bad, depressed day, you know what? Take a second, take 20 minutes, whatever you need, honor that emotion, cry if you want to cry, scream if you want to scream, do something hopefully healthy, try not to hurt anyone around you, but then move it to the side. Some people won't even take the moment to honor their emotion. They'll just kind of, bottle it up, and it comes out passive aggressively or aggressively in bad ways. So, reflect on the emotion, and then you got to just move past it and figure out, like you said, what's step one for today.
What a lot of these guys that I interviewed, not a lot of them, all of them, every successful person, I read a lot of biographies too, is when they don't feel like doing the thing, they do it anyway. That is the secret. That is what differentiates the average person from the Michael Jordans in the world. There's that story when Michael Jordan had the flu, and then he comes in and very successfully does well in the game, and then he collapses and he's dying from the flu. Not literally dying, but it's when we don't want to do it, but we do those things anyway. That is what makes the difference. And it's very hard to do, but it's necessary.
It's tough, but it makes you mentally strong, and it's a muscle that needs to be worked. I mean, I felt that just this morning. I'm recovering from an ACL surgery, and it's been tough not doing jiu-jitsu, but I've replaced that for the time being with going to the gym. And I've worked out decently hard this week, and today my body was sore, and I felt my mind giving me every excuse to not go. And I'm like, and that's exactly why you need to go. You know what I mean? That's
Yeah.
exactly why you need to show up. And I even felt myself dragging my feet through the gym today. And I'm like, oh, just maybe I'll just do, half of what I wanted to do today. And I'm like, nope, push through it, live in the misery, enjoy it. Because I knew when it was done, I'd be like, good job, Eric. You did it. You know what I mean? That's tough to do, man. It's a lot of people, it's so much easier to sit down and be like, no, I need a break. Yeah, maybe you do. And maybe you're just making an excuse. You need to, suck it up and move forward. You know what I mean?
Let me add one thing too,
Go
if
ahead.
you don't mind, because
Please.
it's easy to go on these podcasts or hear a speech. And I watch these things and I watch people say, you got to do it anyway when it's hard. And there's this guy I see him, I'm forgetting his name, but he's a Navy SEAL and he's got books out and doing podcasts. He's a hard charger and he runs all the time, no matter what. And you see these people who never quit or seemingly never quit. And it's easy to hear that advice and then you not follow it, and then for you to feel defeated. But here's the thing, I'm going to assume you too, and all of these people, they have their moments too, when they sit there and eat a bag of chips or have too much to drink and they just spaced out and watch Netflix. We all do. I don't care who you are. And so even though I'm preaching, you got to keep moving forward. We have our moments too. We all do. And, but when that goes on for too far and too long, you have to force yourself and take that step towards your goal, and don't feel like because you had a bad day or a bad few days or whatever that it's over. It's just right. You can restart right now at this moment and keep going.
Well, there's 100%, man. It makes perfect sense because there is no perfection. And again, like you talked about, the most successful, motivated, the Tony Robbins of the world, or like a David Goggins.
That's what I was thinking.
Are you thinking of it? Okay.
Yeah.
I wasn't sure if that's where you're going, but you hear some of these people and you're like, David Goggins was in my head today at the gym because I listened to his, podcast with Joe Rogan, and I'm just like, nope, that's why you got to do 10 more right now. You know what I mean? But it's okay to have the bad days, man. Such is life. That's why you're on here. I mean, listen to your story of where you've come from, where you've gone, where you've been. People all over the world are having similar situations, and maybe they don't have the best community of support and friends around them to help them out, but we're all capable of finding this within us. And man, I've had plenty of moments where I've wanted to sit in the corner and suck my thumb. Trust me. You know what I mean? Life's not easy, but what in life that's super easy is really enjoyable. So you have to try to find happiness in the grind and in the misery of it, and be completely grateful for those beautiful, amazing moments that do come in your life, and just appreciate them, because you never know when that next, moment's going to come again, or when there's a bad one waiting for you around the corner. So you just got to take it in little segments and memories and make the best of it.
I think David Goggins at times can be highly inspirational, and he can also have the opposite effect, because at least what we see, he's just unbelievable in terms of being superhuman.
Superhuman is the word I was searching my head for. Yeah.
At least what we see. And so if I'm on the edge of, like you were the other day, or I might go to the gym, I don't know, I'm sore, Goggins might push me over the edge and get me to the gym. But if I'm really in a low spot, I can easily say, he's superhuman, I'm not. Therefore, I'm not going to ever be that. So I'm going to grab another bag of chips.
Right.
And so I think you just got to look at it in terms of accepting it. I imagine even Goggins has a bag of chips here and there, you know what I mean, and watches Netflix. So take that with a grain of salt.
Of course. No, I agree with you. I think it's important to bring that perspective, because often people that start whatever new path that they're on, when they slip, they're like, well, see, I'm not good at this. And then they just completely give up. And it's like, no, you might see whatever these people are at their final level of success, call it black belt, David Goggins, whoever it may be, yourself. They don't see the journey. You know what I mean? You look at Michael Jordan and you see the best of all time. You don't see the guy like you talked about that's, when everyone else is going home, is still shooting 1,000 baskets, even though he's a multimillionaire, he's still sticking to that discipline. There's a lot of work and grinding and consistent failures and down moments and moments of all of us. I mean, if you've trained in martial arts, I'm sure there's plenty of moments you've gone home thinking that you absolutely suck. You know what I mean? There's no way. That's what I'm saying. In martial arts, there's no way to keep an ego too long because it's constantly checked. Because you could also have another week where you feel like you are the man and no one could touch you, and
Yeah.
that gets squashed the very next day that you show up. And that's life, though. One day you're like, man, life's amazing. Next day, life sucks. It's amazing again. It sucks. It's a roller coaster. But you just got to keep, pushing as best you can. And like you said, we all have our moments, and that's okay too. So accept the whole package, the whole picture. Chuck, it's such a pleasure. I feel like I could have you on again. I'd love to, and spend a lot more time talking to you. And it's an honor and privilege that I'm very grateful for this opportunity. It reminds me of why I started this venture in the first place, to meet people like yourself, and to hear these stories and share our life experience and wisdom. If people want to follow you more, what are some of the, and of course I'm going to include this in the show notes, but if they're listening right now, what is the best way to contact you to find out information on your books? Or I would assume you're on social media where they can maybe follow you a little bit more and learn a little bit more about what you have to offer them.
My home-based website is chuckrylant.com. The Rylant is Rylant. That's kind of the entry point to a lot of my stuff. All my books are on Amazon. That's the cheapest, fastest way to get them. I'm really pretty active on Facebook. That's the easiest way to get kind of closer access to me. If you join my email list at my website, if you buy one of my books, I do a monthly print newsletter to my customers I send out. So all of those are all different ways that you can reach me. I'm on all the other social medias, but pretty much Facebook is kind of where I hang out.
Excellent. And then I know you just, released a new book, but do you have in mind what the next step for you, the next goal is?
Well, there's a book that I want to write, but I'm putting it aside because I started a PhD program in psychology recently, and that kind of connects to our discussion. I really don't have much of a career need for it. It will help me in some ways, but I needed a new goal, something to keep me working towards something, to keep my mind going. And that's kind of where a lot of my time is being spent right now. So it's hard to write a book and do that at the same time. So.
Sure. Well, I think we all need new goals and new ventures. And I think once you settle and think you've learned it all, is the day you start dying. So good for you to keep grinding and pushing and motivating yourself to better yourself, even if it's not for financial gain, but just to, become a better version of yourself. So I wanted to thank you one more time, sir, for coming on. I'd love to connect with you even after the show and see how we could collaborate more. But I really hope people look a little bit more into your books, into your website, because there's a lot of insight and a lot of knowledge that I just got out of discussing with you and your story. So I really appreciate you being candid and open and allowing us to dive a little bit into your life. So thank you so much for coming on.
I appreciate getting to chat with you. I knew we were on similar paths when I watched some of your videos, so it was a real joy to get to meet you a little bit more.
All right. Thank you, sir. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you enjoyed today's podcast. One more time, thank you to Chuck Ryland for coming on the podcast, and have a great week. Talk to you soon.